has been at this extraordinary place called the AA, which my friends think might be Alcoholics Anonymous. It might be the Automobile Association in Britain, but those people that really know me know that it's a school called the Architectural Association. We were founded 170 years ago in London, and there's a great, as with any place, there's a great mythical story. So we were founded by 3 students disaffected by education and the way of teaching architects, and they rebelled. They tried to find a new way of teaching and thinking about architecture. So I am going to show you, in the most random way possible, the world of the AA. We produce a ton of work, a lot of work. There are 30 different undergraduate units. We're 800 students in total. There are 10 different graduate programs, and my God, we just produce work. We're defined by our work. We're hired and fired based on our work, so everything is about the work. There's one little anomaly at the AA. Every single one of us has a 1-year contract. So if we're no good, the contract isn't renewed in year 2. So there's massive competition, which is incredibly exciting. So I'm going to take you into the world of the AA for a few minutes. Hey guys, sometimes when I'm showing a film, the screen on the left is better, and other times we work with the bigger screen, okay? We're located in 2 places. One is obviously in the very center of London. The other is this, wait, I have to get my, good. The other is this place in the forest called Hook Park, where we experiment building at a very, very large scale. So I always like to start this way. Classrooms have become places of distraction. Attention is elsewhere. Fortunately, at the AA, we don't ever teach in a classroom because we're not a school with classrooms. We exist in old Georgian houses in the center of London. So whether we're in the center of London, and I'll show you some of the work there, or way out in the Atacama Desert in Chile, where we also run a program, it's all about thinking and learning about architecture at absolutely the edge of experimentation. There we are in Bedford Square. This is the kind of building we inhabit. Have you all been? Oh no, okay, this is great. I'm going to take you, I know you've been. The rest of you, listen, I'm going to take you on a little trip, all right? Come on, Bedford Square, Georgian buildings. It's where people, old aristocrats, stuffy human beings used to have their homes. We now teach in their bedrooms, living rooms, kitchens, and dining rooms. So it's fantastic. 800 students crammed into tiny little rooms. I think it creates a great frisson and a great excitement. This is graduation day out in front of the AA. Big photo of everyone graduating, and then a fantastic man, young student there, a guy named Jack Self, who is the curator of the Venice Biennale for Great Britain this year, which will open next week. Jack Self deciding at the AA you can't just take a photo, you got to do something a little more dramatic. So he donned his white suit and ran in front of the photograph for everyone. Similarly, these are our buildings. And this is a kind of typical day out in front of the AA. You're never going to know what's going to show up or what's going to happen. It's a school of wild unpredictability. You're never quite sure. And then this is a look back into the history of the school. This is the front members' room, still one of the rooms of the school, but this is looking at it about 70 or 80 years ago in a different place in time, but no less, let's say, kind of wild and crazy. We also have been the center of architecture culture in London for a long time. Frank Lloyd Wright, been at the school, Le Corbusier. We've hosted and entertained is an important part of the school. We've hosted, but we've entertained almost the whole of architectural history for the 20th century, which I think gives the place a real significance within the history of architecture. But then this is how we work. And I love it. Hippie teachers at the AA. Frankly, we're all still hippie teachers. We're all kids who haven't grown up in a way, who are just trying to experiment and find different ways of thinking. So here's a few people back in the 70s, early 80s, working really early with broadcasting media as a form of experimenting with architecture. You might know us more from what we do out in front of our buildings. We use the square in front to constantly experiment and to build. This is a project, an early project by Co-op Himmelblau that they built out in front of the AA. Some students worked with John Haydup, the legendary New York architect, to construct one of his pieces out in front of Bedford Square. And then you come more to the 21st century, very beginning of the 21st century, to one of our programs and that built the extraordinary pavilion, the DRL pavilion, out in front. We also built hairdos, apparently. My favorite image of this is these two people up here having their lunch. So those guys have climbed this thing in midday in London, and they've gone up and they've had their lunch up top. But this is a piece of work built by some second-year students at the school, who went all the way from design to realization within about a 7-month period. And here's another one of those. Layers and layers and layers of plywood veneer. Fortunately, we were sponsored by a wood company. So in that way, it was affordable to build. But nevertheless, again, a project by second and third year students in the school, which really special. They started the beginning of the year having no idea what they were going to do. And by the end of the year, 8-9 months later, had realized the project amongst just 12 of them, which I think was a real accomplishment and achievement. The school has an amazing history for the last half of the 20th century. You guys will know David Green and Peter Cook, Warren Chalk and the other members of Architecturная who came out of the AA. David Green is a very good friend, someone who also I feel a close affinity with, because he always tells me making these magazines was the most haphazard thing in the world. If they needed a giraffe looking in a certain direction, they used to flip through the newspaper, try to find a giraffe. If they couldn't find a giraffe, an ostrich would work, and they'd cut him out and paste him in. So it was before Photoshop, before technology. They made all of their magazines out of the Sunday Times newspaper in London, which is really extraordinary. You'll also obviously be aware that Rem Koolhaas is a recent graduate, well, not recent anymore, Rem's getting old now. He's a graduate of the school from the 70s. Has gone on to a real prominent career and also has given back and has taught for many years at the school. Richard Rogers is another renowned graduate, recent graduate, let's say 20th century graduate of the school. Richard Rogers famously, this is to every one of you who's a terrible student, your future is not over, all right? Richard Rogers' report famously from the AA says could apply himself more. So it just shows David Green also for Architecturная, when he won the gold medal, big prize in Britain for his career, he said that this is to all the slackers in the world. He said this isn't to the people that work super hard. He said this is to all the people that are just creative in mind and just manage to do something. And I think that's a little bit of the ethos and the spirit. Denise Scott Brown, Robert Venturi and Denise Scott Brown. Denise Scott Brown is also a graduate of the school. This is the National Gallery of the Sainsbury Wing in London. Just to show you something different. Other forms, so here we have Richard Rogers with Renzo Piano. Here you have Rem Koolhaas. And then on the other hand, you have all different dialogue, a different type of architectural discourse with Denise Scott Brown and Robert Venturi. David Chipperfield is also a graduate of the school in the mid-half of the 20th century. This is his Jumex Gallery and Museum in Mexico City. So what I'm trying to get to say here is that architecture at the AA doesn't end when your education does, but what we strive to do is to prepare you for a career of making and realizing buildings. And I think that's always been the most important thing to the school. We're not a school that wants to make architectural education academic. We want to make architectural education professional and train students and professionals who will go out and have an extraordinary impact in the field. And then you sadly can't see it there, but one of our greatest graduates who died very recently, Zaha Hadid, was a graduate of the school, teacher at the school, a patron and supporter of the AA to the moment of her death. And someone who I think we all felt an affinity with. Someone said, "Did you know Zaha?" I said, "You must be kidding. I've been at the AA for 10 years. I couldn't help but know Zaha." Zaha was a part of the school, knew everyone in the school, and literally did have an influence every single moment in the school, whether she was physically there or not. So she will be unquestionably missed. It's a fantastic photo of Zaha with Alvin Boyarsky, the chairman of the AA in the 1970s and early 1980s, who transformed an experimental school of architecture into a radical school of architecture. One where Bernard Schumi was a unit master, a tutor, where Peter Wilson of Bowles Wilson, where Rem Koolhaas, where Zaha Hadid, where Elia Zenhadas. I mean, my lord, it's extraordinary. I mean, I teach in this history. It's painful, all right? I mean, honestly. Oh my God, is it a lot to live up to? But it's also what makes it spectacular, is that it is a lot to live up to, but you live up to it because it's inspiring as can be. There's a man, I don't know if you guys, do you know Will Alsop? Yeah, okay, great. Because Will Alsop is also someone. There's Will as a very, very young man, and Alvin in the days when you could smoke a cigar in school. There are still one or two people hanging around the AA that still try to smoke inside, even though it's outlawed. But Will Alsop, absolutely another important figure through the school. And then someone, you guys, who I don't know how much he's known outside of the UK. And that's this really, really loony man over here. Just there in the right-hand corner, a man named Cedric Price. If you don't know Cedric Price, you're going to get to know him pretty well because we're publishing a huge book of Cedric Price's thinking. If you don't know Cedric Price, well, you will leave today and look him up. He'll change your way of thinking within a minute, and it's spectacular. He's a super creative man. Didn't build a lot. In fact, about the only thing he built was a birdhouse in the zoo in London. But he's an extremely bright, creative, intelligent man who was an extraordinary educator, whose son now looks a lot like him and still prowls around the AA on a regular basis. Then to Rem, who was at the school very, very recently lecturing. Madeline Vriesendorp, you know, who did the, where's Madeline? She's just there with the silver hair. In fact, what's great is Madeline is the only woman you can see in that washed out photo. Madeline with the silver hair, his longtime collaborator wife, who with him did Delirious New York. And Madeline was the artist who did all the drawings in Delirious New York. And she's someone else that hangs around the school. So the AA, we're a school of 800 students. 30 undergraduate units. Each one of those units has 12 students, and then 10 graduate programs of about 300 to 350 students. You guys, if you go online, if you're interested in what we're doing right now, you go online and you find this thing, the AA prospectus. This is a page of the prospectus. This happens to be my unit, as I would self-promoting, yeah. This is my unit. Then similarly, another unit, Diploma Unit 6. But you can go through our prospectus and just see the debates and agendas which we think are important at the AA right now. I'm going to run through a little bit of work. I'm going to show you work that may mean something to you, might not mean anything. This isn't really a student cutting through the floor of the AA. It's an incredibly well photoshopped image. But we work in loads of different ways is why I'm showing this. I don't want to show any form of consistency whatsoever. If you walk out of this room and you say, I know what the AA does, I've failed spectacularly. I want to show you such a different way of thinking, so many different ways of thinking, because we're a school that really does thrive on heterogeneity. Experimentation in loads of different forms. So whether you're experimenting just through, this is a hand drawing by a student in his 4th year, all the way to kind of visualizations about inhabiting the rooftop of the Amazon rainforest. So whether you're going from a spectacularly speculative, kind of quite intimate image to something as grand and extraordinary as inhabiting the rooftop of the Amazon rainforest, that's things that we're debating and questioning. Similarly, there's a whole nother language, a kind of challenging of the corporate structure of architecture. One unit in particular that for years now has just dwelt on how we rethink the way that corporate business controls a kind of architectural language and vocabulary. Then there are the spectacular images, the kind of extraordinary nature of trying to think beyond our planet, beyond the space where we inhabit. And I walked around just before I got on the flight and thought I'd take some photos of what was going on around school a little bit. These are some models recently made by the DRL students where they're exploring obviously with robots and with all different forms of manufacture and machining and making new forms of architectural language, new forms of materials and language. Working also with lasers as a kind of form of creating architectural space. Defining architectural space through it, but also seeing how that is something incredibly different to David Green of Archigram wearing finally the suit that he imagined about 40 years ago. David always wanted wearable architecture. Always thought you should be wearing your buildings, wearing your structures. So finally, David, about 5 years ago now, got to realize his dream of wearing his architectural suit that he had designed about 40 years earlier. So it's a great kind of image for me to see someone who has gone long enough to see his ideas that could only be in his imagination and as a drawing, able to be realized through the kind of contemporary technology that we have today. David's also been around the school for that long and has never left it. Obviously, many of you will work with 3D printing, working with a lot of different softwares. Software is prevalent at the school, but it isn't all pervasive. We all use technology, but at the same time, we also go to the grocery store for architecture. And I like this a lot. This is how extreme it is at the AA. 1 minute you're 3D printing, having worked with advanced software. The next minute you go to the grocery store, you get some pasta shells, and you begin to form and think about making an architectural language out of that. So I said to a group of students I was lecturing to a few weeks ago in China, I said, there's no excuse for not experimenting in architecture because all the ingredients are at your grocery store. You don't have to go any further for either your imagination or for your materials. These are some weird things going on in the Design Research Laboratory right now. Master's program at the AA that was at the forefront of digital technology. And these are just a few pieces. I just went into the studio, photographed these, and then these are all little weird things that move. And I have no idea what Theo's doing with them, but Theo's a magician over there. He's a bit of an alchemist, has a studio of about 100 students. Theo and about 10 other tutors, including Patrick Schumacher, who was one of the founding members of the program, DRL. The two of them are always exploring at the kind of extremes. I have no idea what these little things do. At the same time, another program, MTech, working with really maximizing and optimizing different forms, and glimpses into all kind of different, you see, models in making are a really important part. I think I'm showing you probably more making than drawings for a reason, because they really are. Making is the way by which we express ourselves in the school. Images, again, out of the Design Research Lab, out of Patrick's studio, of future languages, future ways of thinking about architecture, different forms. I mean, it still strikes me how close this is to the past I showed you a minute ago. And I like that dichotomy. I ran up to the MTech studio, and this is a model they're making right now. Some of the students are producing. I have no idea what it is, but this is the kind of environment of the AA. Guys, I want every one of you, if you've not been, please come. Look me up. I'll walk you around and spend hours with you. Because it is a tour. It is, I mean, I literally, guys, all I did was take my little iPhone camera and thought I've got to go around school and be able to show them what's happening right now. Not what happened 20 years ago, what's going on right now. And this is just a model. As soon as I came out of the lift and walked in the door, there it was. This is what they were working on. So there's that kind of frisson around the place. And then I just ran down into the lecture hall, and there was the first year students presenting work that they were doing. And I thought, well, first of all, I thought, oh my God, if I could have only done that in my first year, it would be amazing where I would be now. It's extraordinary to just see, at one moment, there's this great kind of collection of people debating something, at another, students whiling away, making things. The school is just a buzz of activity. This is a shot of a kind of recently made construction. This was just down in the photo studio. They were doing some weight testing on a kind of model out of one of the units in the undergraduate school. This is a weird, weird troll through the world of the AA. Does it give you some sense, guys, of the diversity? All right, God, I hope you guys are really quiet, yeah. I mean, you guys are really quiet. I mean, oh my goodness, you're really serious. Don't take it very seriously at all. I'm not serious about it at all. Yeah? It's super fun. I mean, it's absolutely magnificent fun. I mean, Alex, who brought me here today, Alex, who's running a program for us in Moscow this summer. I mean, Alex is someone who's you've been in this world for, 15, 18 months, and have kind of been immersed. This is kind of just what it's like every day. Another kind of image into different work that's coming out of a program. But guys, most of all, what I'm doing right now is what we love to do at the AA, and that is to communicate. It's great to make things, fantastic to explore and to experiment, but you've got to be able to communicate. And one of the most important, I think, educational lessons at the AA is communication. It's why I think Rem is such an extraordinary communicator, why I think Zaha was such an extraordinary communicator. It's on that the project doesn't stop on the table. The project comes on presenting, thinking, and reimagining the project on the table. So this is a recent jury in the AA. And then another one, this is a great event each summer we're coming up to. In a couple of weeks, the very best students out of the undergraduate school will have to stand up in front of the entire school, present their project, both live and on a video relay to other rooms of the building, present their project in order to be voted to win the kind of school's highest award, which is called the Diploma with Honors. A couple students get it every year. But then just back to the, about 3-4 weeks ago now, Archigram finally realized their opera in another big space in the school. So one evening extraordinary performance in the spaces of the school, and I think that's kind of trying to highlight a living school. A school where we have a gallery. This is showing the work of a mid-20th century British man named Walter Siegel, who was big on self-build. And upstairs in the front members' room, a very recent exhibition on the extraordinary drawings of Jan Kaplicki. Do you all know Jan Kaplicki? Future Systems. Look them up if you don't know them. Future Systems, Jan Kaplicki. These drawings are mesmerizing just because of the fact that they were done before Photoshop, Illustrator, or anything else. So what's nice is, you see where Jan, I mean the drawings are just extraordinarily detailed. You see where Jan had to scratch out with a knife in order to redraw with the pen. But they're an amazing set of visions of the future. And the gallery hosting other events and other things, a Venice Biennale exhibition which came through. We're obviously an extraordinary old school of architecture, and at the very same time going and right down delving and publishing into e-books. We're also a publishing house. Chamber works. Since then, Alvin Boyarsky really began it. We're a school that constantly publishes 20 to 25 books a year on agendas either of the units in the school or of architects working outside but affiliated with the school. This is also the bookshop. We have a bookshop in the school. I'm kind of taking you on a tour, yeah? This is kind of weird. This is a remote tour of the AA. You got to kind of feel like you're living it. This is the worst photo of the bar you will ever see. The single most important space in the AA, guys. When you come to the AA, the first thing you will ever go to is the bar. Because the bar, and the reason I say it's such a bad photograph, it doesn't look like there's anyone there. The truth is, it's the most lively place. It's also a gallery space. There'll be in between exhibitions here. But Darko, the man behind the bar, is also a bit of a figure and a legend at the school. And somewhere where David Bowie and Mick Jagger used to come in the 70s. So it's a place where the AA is open door. We're not closed, we're not locked. You push against the black door at 36 and the entire world can come in our door, see what we're doing, and kind of participate in the debates. So those stories of David Bowie hanging out in school, Mick Jagger hanging out in school, wasn't because they were architects. It was because there was a cultural vitality of the school, which I think really continues on to today. Now, we also, guys, okay, now you got to twist your brain like 180 degrees, okay? You've been in London, you've been in the middle of all of this. We also own a forest, but we bought it for £1, so it's nothing exclusive at all. We bought a forest called Hook Park for £1, and we experiment with a different scale of architecture there. And we experiment at a much bigger scale. So we have master's programs there that go all the way. You saw what the second and third year students were doing in the square at Bedford Square. Here students build at a whole different scale, a whole different way of thinking and working, but only using the wood of the forest. So they take and experiment with the timber and the trees in the forest in order to make structures in Hook Park. So this was designed and realized in large part by students at the school, all different types of timber out of the forest being used. And that's one way of thinking about timber. Then there's this extraordinary structure for drawing wood that was all done by steam bending ash. It had never been done before. They really experimented with how to steam bend ash and use it as a structural system for building a drawing shed that kind of came to look like that and then like that. with a kind of random structure. So these are students, again, experimenting at different scales. And then most recently, I've completed this building, which is really fascinating, because you guys, when you, I tell you, perfect example. You know when I walked in here today, we stopped at a timber exhibition. Every piece of timber in that exhibition had been milled to within an inch of its life. The tree was no longer present at all. The timber was modified, it was made into perfect rectangles, squares, it was made into orthogonal shapes. What they're trying to do in this project out at Hook Park now is to 3D scan trees. Do you all do 3D scanning? You know, working with the 3D scanner. What we're doing at Hook Park is we're 3D scanning the tree so you can know where to cut it and you don't have to do a thing to it. So this truss here, this kind of quite extraordinary truss here, is literally just made out of a series of trees that have been 3D scanned and then cut at the key points and then assembled and built into a truss, as opposed to ever modifying the material itself. And then it kind of came out to look like this. It's another drawing shed, which I have a problem with, because in Britain it's rainy as can be. I just have no idea how this is going to dry anything, frankly. But this is a whole different set of experimentations. Now we can go one of two ways, guys. I'm going to let the decision come to you. You've seen a little bit about what we're doing at Bedford Square, a little bit about what we're doing in Hook Park. Now I can take this lecture two ways. I can either show you what we're doing around the globe, or I can show you what I do in my unit at the AA. Which would you prefer? You want to see what I'm doing in my unit? Listen, the reason I think that might be nice is you've got a bigger picture now. If I stick with the global view, you're going to get just more bigger picture. If I take you into the world of my unit, you're going to see something really specific and really particular. So let me just bear with me for half a second. Fortunately, I'm prepared for option 2. Wow, okay, ready? Okay. I work with a restaurant in Copenhagen called Noma. If you don't know this restaurant in Copenhagen, look them up. It's N-O-M-A. I've never been in such a creative place in my life. I always thought architecture schools were the greatest creative places. I've found the kitchens in the last few years are the most amazing creative places. So there's this extraordinary chef, a guy named René Redzepi, who's quite a charismatic man, who I got to know a couple of years ago, who said, why don't you come look into what we're doing in our research labs and see if there's anything you can do with that. So I've done that, and I call this Mad Lab Explosion. It's a presentation, or part of a presentation I gave to a big Wired magazine event in London in the autumn, and it shows a little bit of the world of what we're doing in the unit. Now I have no idea why that did that. Yeah. Oh no, man. Hold on a minute. Okay, I'm interested in mold, fungus, as one thing in the unit. I look at that and I see architecture. Ariel, the research scientist at Noma, sees a way of cooking and making food where I see architecture. Ariel makes what I think are just these most extraordinary little drawings. Scale is something I'm really interested in personally, and in this sense, Ariel's drawings are at about, you guys ready? You know when you do a 1 to 100 drawing? This is about 1,000 to 1, all right? It's the opposite direction of scale. And Ariel's little drawings, I just think, are so extraordinarily architectural that I wanted to see how I could work with this and how we could work with it in the unit. So what we did, first I want to show you Lars, all right? Lars is their head of research at Noma. Lars is a really cool guy, I mean way cool. And Lars, you can see him there, is fermenting plums. Now, Lars kind of, this is a ridiculous film. It's a film of Lars in the process for fermenting plums. Now for Noma, this is really important for the way that they cook and think about food. But for me, I love the plastic bag. Because as you can imagine, what's going to happen here is as these things sit in that little container, the architecture was in the bag, whereas for Lars, the food was what was inside the bag. So Lars and I, 2 years ago, started a great conversation we carry on till today about how his bags and the different things that he's experimenting with, we can turn into architecture. And that's what I'm going to show you now over a set of 3 edibles, 3 processes, and 3 projects, okay? 3 kinds of food, 3 processes, 3 projects. First, we took a potato, all right? What you could do with a potato, it's unimaginable. I didn't believe it before. We took a potato, and with a student named Dahlia, we built a little fermentation lab. Dahlia likes to call herself Dr. Fontini, but she isn't really Dr. Fontini. And we built this weird little fermentation lab in the studio, and just started letting it, applying different gases and different yeasts. NOMA has their super scientific fermentation lab. We have our much more ad hoc fermentation lab that nonetheless really was amazingly architectural, guys. You know, I mean, you look at that and you think, oh my God, this is just a little bit of yeast, a little bit of gas that it's producing, starting to work with, we worked with an old kids material that you would use to blow up balloons, sat that material on top, and then it blew up literally by the gases being released out of the mixture that we've set up below. So then what our processes do, and this shows this, so we filled all these little cups with different ingredients, put them into this thing, and let them blow up, and let them just kind of explode and create this architectural space. Then we photographed that, and saw that inherently in that was this great kind of language or kind of way of working. And this, guys, don't forget, is just come from an idea of Lars fermenting plums. And then we drew it. And that was a really nice moment, because that's when we went from something that was, let's say, a little bit more abstract and not quite sure how it was within our field of architecture to, boy, that's just a wonderful architectural drawing for us. I mean, that's such a special architectural drawing. All it is a drawing of those bubbles and those different things. But for us, that became a plan, a potential plan. It became a potential elevation. It had a whole architectonic life about it. At the same time, there's this wonderful factory in Copenhagen called the Carlsberg Factory for beer, where they ferment on a huge scale. And what we were working with Dahlia we really liked is that you could change the scale. So we took that drawing there, and we turned it into this architectural project here. And you can see the remnants of that drawing there in this one here. So what we did is we took NOMA, and their restaurant right now is that little thing there, and we took NOMA and we moved them onto this other island. And we changed and utterly transformed the way that they eat, people eat, the way that you cook, the way you experiment. And we also, they run a huge festival every summer, and we integrated the festival with the restaurant to create a whole new space on the island and completely reform an island that kind of doesn't have a use so much at the moment. And this is an aerial view of the project, because then there's a whole idea about this. This is an island that needs to be transformed. It has a lot of dilapidated buildings on it. Buildings need to be transformed, and the island needs to be reused. The way that we were going to reuse this island is we called this project Fermenting Paper Island. Because again, we stole the term from the restaurant. We're going to, rather than fermenting some plums, we're going to ferment an entire island as a way of transforming it. So in effect, what happens over a period of time, and this is at the absolute height of it, is that these existing buildings, and these are the buildings just here, go through about a 12-step process to being fermented or deconstructed and transformed by an extraordinary kind of process of fermentation, architectural fermentation, that literally begins to blow up and take the pieces of the building away. So they start to take the pieces of the building. You see all the fermentation chambers just down here in the lower bit. They're fermenting. It's taking the building apart. And the building then floats off, and all the buildings float off and disperse around Copenhagen and around Denmark. And you're left for an island that's ready for reconstruction. So that the project not only had, in that sense, it not only had a visual quality, a kind of extraordinary kind of visual quality, but at the same time, it's just like we do out here every day. You take a building down and you replace it. We just want to find a different way of taking a building down and replacing it. And this was through this 5-year act of fermenting an island, as opposed to just taking and bringing in the bulldozers. So it was a different way of thinking of urban regeneration. Now this project is coming up as a papaya. This is a bit weirder. Ray is the guy we worked with. And this is a little film. If you guys know a papaya, and you cut open the papaya, and inside are all these little seeds. All Ray did was blow up the seeds to that scale, and then he made this weird structure where he wanted to recreate the membrane of the papaya, but as a material object. So Ray built this whole structure, and there it goes, yeah? Those are his papaya seeds smashing a piece of plaster in order to begin to create an architectural membrane. So he's reinterpreting the papaya in one of the, and these are the things he made. Hey guys, these things are beautiful. I mean, some people don't like my visual language, but I really like it, yeah? All right? I mean, these things are amazing. This is what that silly contraption produced. But then the thing is, Ray got really good at it. So, I mean, this thing here, guys, on the table, sits about that high. And it is wafer thin. He got really good at striking these things and making these unbelievable forms that just came from the idea. Because when you go home tonight, this is the idea that your dinner can provide your architectural inspiration. You cut a papaya and you say, hey, there's flesh, there's meat, there's a membrane, and there's a seed. And all he simply did was kind of use that as an inspiration for how to make his project. So then Ray wasn't content there. This is just a silly video. Ray was trying to decide how to build a part of that membrane now at a different scale. So Ray is old school, yeah? And we love Ray's old school way of working. And Ray was thinking about how to do this membrane. So he was literally hyperventilating as he blew up all these balloons, but experimenting then not with plaster any longer, but with different materials and forms in how to explore just a piece of that. And what that then turned into was what we described as a floating forest. So Ray's project begins just down here and makes a 12-month journey through the center of Copenhagen that looks something like this. You can just see his project there, floating, he points it out, floating in the middle of Copenhagen, and it's growing. Food grows on it, birds inhabit and nest on it. It becomes a floating forest through Copenhagen that at the end of 12 months tips over, you'll see in a drawing in a second, and can be harvested. So simply out of his papaya that he had for lunch, he imagined an entire architectural project for how to feed Copenhagen, and that also, in his mind, works with the way that René Redzepi works, and that is foraging for food. These things float around the center of Copenhagen. Here you can see right now it's just starting to grow, and that by the end of 12 months, it will have grown, toppled over, and you will harvest the food that's on it. This is the method of construction on the right, all the way to over here, where he kind of tries to draw it when it's grown, and then all the different bird species that will inhabit it. And then a drawing that he made of them both standing, but then also how they would fall to be harvested every 12 months. And this is a 12-month process, these floating forests revolving around Copenhagen. Okay, we do slightly weird things. We also go to ceramic studio, and we casted leaks. We want to see what a leak could do. And you guys, what's the word for leak in Russian? Do you guys know these things?
Yes.
What are they called in Russian?
Pare.
Pare. So we decided, and you know how tight those things are. You know, when you cut them at home, there doesn't seem to be any space. We had some students who worked their oven unbelievably and found the space in a leak. So this is 0 hours dehydration at 50 degrees. And when you make a plaster cast of a leak, you get something like that. This is 4 hours at 50 degrees. and you're starting to get a bit more of an interior structure, 12 hours at 100 degrees, and then finally 16 hours at 50 degrees, and you look at all the space that's in that leak, and you look at that amazing surface texture. And I think weirdly I teach with a guy named Chris. For Chris and I, there's an architectural language there. There's a way of thinking about architecture. There's a way of drawing from food, a kind of language for architecture. And that's what we kind of do through these little experiments. The last one, a beech nut. A beech nut is the national kind of nut of Denmark. And we worked with a student all the way to build a project inspired by both the brick, but also through the composting machine. This is the composting machine at Noma. When you finish your meal at Noma, I don't think anything's left, frankly. But I mean, if there is anything left, I mean, it's weird. But anything that is left goes in here. And then within 36 hours, super fast, it comes out as compost. So Bodo, the German guy, was really concerned about what was happening with all this compost, or wanted to use it in a different way. And he was inspired by this amazing church in Copenhagen. So we worked with him to then produce out of this compost machine compost bricks. So we produced bricks of all different sorts out of this compost machine, and we actually found that toilet paper is the best additive. So if you take Noma's compost and you take a roll of toilet paper from your house, you can make an extraordinary brick. But it's a brick that doesn't last too long. So what we liked was, and these are his crazy drawings about characteristics of compost and the material qualities of the brick, we tested these bricks then to see how much force they would take, to see if they worked well in compression or not. And then we also tested them in tension, but we also were particularly interested in their lifespan. And where the other two projects were, let's say, slightly more utopian, this project has a slightly dystopic quality in that it takes an historical language of Copenhagen, imposes another structure over it, but ultimately produces this kind of visualization, moving all the way from the construction of the project here on the left to the kind of, let's say, prominence of the midlife of the project all the way to 5 years later. So when I had to present this project to a group of people, I described it as most people's worst nightmare. That in 5 years, your house has to be reconstructed. But what we loved about this is that the compost brick is a material that lasts for about 5 years, that will grow, food will grow out of it, birds will inhabit it and everything, completely different architectural language. Then your house begins to fall apart, and you've got to count on the restaurant to have people stop eating their food so that you can make more bricks to rebuild your house. And we just like the fact that the way that Noma cooks today, these bricks would sprout different things would grow in them. And then 5 years from now, when they're cooking different food, different things would grow out of them. So we like that transformative quality of them. And that's a glimpse into my youth, Jeff. 3 projects out of the unit. If I come back in 12 months and show you what we're doing, 12 months from now, we're finishing a whole set of new projects now, having worked with them again this year. And next year, we're going to spend and continue to work with Noma, but there's a crazy restaurant in Sweden called Fabriken by a guy named Magnus Nilsson, and he experiments in a different way, and we're going to work with Noma and him in order to kind of keep this kind of architecture. I'll say something about Alex, who invited me here. Alex, who studied at the AA, was a fabulous student at the AA, is now moved back to Moscow. She came to me about 12 months ago and said, Chris, I want to bring the AA to Moscow. Well, we tried this a few years ago, and we didn't work. And I thought maybe it's because people don't know the AA, we weren't set up at the right place, or for all kinds of reasons it really didn't work. Alex is trying again, and Alex is a tour de force. So the fact is I have no doubt it will work. But this summer in July, we're going to carry on not my experimentation, but some of Alex's experimentation with the city, with constructivism, and thinking about ways of living in Moscow, but with the same experimental and kind of, let's say, intellectual and experimental drive. And listen, if any of you are interested, we'd love to have anyone come along. We're going to run a public program as a part of that, which will mean that anyone can come listen to the lectures that are given in the evenings. We'll bring people in from all different places, and really in a way, I hope, over the next 5, 10 years, build between the AA and MARSH a really nice collaboration that comes to have some kind of impact or resonance in Moscow. And I think it's important. The AA I talked about in London, we skipped the bit outside of London. But the AA also works at about 40 cities globally around the world now, Moscow being one of our most recent. And I really hope we'll be here for years to come. Because, I last came here when I was a kid in 1987. To see the transformation is unbelievable. For the AA to be a part of that, now working with someone here is really special opportunity for us. So, thank you to you all as well. Thanks a lot, Jeff. Cheers.